What's going on YouTube? Josh here checking in. Today I just wanted to follow up on a video I made previously about some of the training I've done in the past, and I'm going to link that in the description box below. So basically I just wanted to talk a little bit about the training I've been doing in the past 8 or so weeks where I've been doing my own programming. So basically I just decided to give it a shot doing my own programming. There's definitely pros and cons of doing your own programming. Some of the advantages that I've seen so far have been the flexibility. Basically, you know, if something comes up, I know what I can cut out of my workout and what's really essential. I know my body better than anybody else does, so I know my own limits better than somebody else may. Some of the cons is that it can be kind of time consuming. I mean, granted, this is my first time doing it, so I'm sure as I continue it'll come a lot more naturally, but it certainly is quite time consuming if you do some smart programming and you don't just throw together random exercises for no purpose. Yeah, so I'd say a big con is the time, and then also the fact that although you do know your own limits, sometimes it's nice having somebody else do the programming for you, because oftentimes they can help you kind of push yourself to a point where you don't maybe know you're capable of, so that could be a potential downside of doing your own programming. And also I find sometimes it is difficult to be objective with yourself. And it's nice to have somebody else to objectively look at your progress and be more realistic. So anyway, what are some of the resources that I use to design my programming? So first off, I would say a lot of it is experience. Personally, from having the opportunity to work with some really great lifters in the past, I've had the opportunity to train at several powerlifting gyms and really get to pick the minds of some really strong guys. For a while there, I was actually being coached by former world record holder in powerlifting. So I've been very fortunate in that sense. I've also spent a lot of time looking at lifters' training logs, whether it be on YouTube or on other websites, just to kind of get an idea of what some of the higher level lifters are doing with their program. And aside from that, I certainly used a lot of resources. So some more scientific things. Over this past summer, I did read a few books. So two of the books that I read that I thought were really helpful are, first, this guy right over here, Science and Practice of Strength Training. And then also another one, which is a classic, Super Training. So this is a really solid book, Super Training, and basically I haven't had a chance to read the entire thing because it is pretty dense, but there's a lot of really great information in there as far as programming and a lot of other aspects of exercise science. On top of that, I used the book by Mark Ripto, which is Practical Programming for Strength Training. That's a pretty easy read, and I definitely recommend it if you're considering doing your own programming. Now on top of that, there were a few internet articles that I utilized, and I also used something called Powerlifting's chart. That's like a chart that gives you an estimated intensity level and then what are the appropriate sets and reps to be using at that specific intensity, which I find is really useful. I'll put a link in the description box below of a really useful article that I found regarding Powerlifting's chart, and it addresses some of the downsides to just write out using the chart as opposed to kind of using a more in-depth look at it and kind of using some formulas. So I'm not going to go into all the details of that because that's an entire video in itself, but I think if you read the article, you'll get the gist of it, so that'll be in the description box below. So from here, I just want to show you guys kind of how I actually went about deciding to break up the programming and things like that. Alright guys, so as you can see, this is kind of how I broke up my training. So first things first, it's always good to set some goals. So up here I have those written down. This board is in my room, so every single day I walk past this and I see what those goals are. So hopefully I'll be able to achieve those goals when I do my next mock meet in the next week or two. So first things first is the way that I decided to periodize this program. So periodization refers to the way you break up your training over the longer term, and I used a linear periodization program which essentially has increasing intensity and diminishing volume as you go throughout the program. So I had essentially 3 primary phases. So the first one was accumulation. That was where I did most of my work under 75%. I did much higher volume, and that was about 3 weeks or so. Then I chose to do a phase that was in the middle, so that was about 75 to 90%, and that's where I like to do most of my work. That was about a month long, and that was followed by a realization phase, which is over 90%, and I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks, followed by a deload or a taper. And then I'm going to do a mock meet coming up shortly. The way that I chose to break up my programming, I like to do 3 days a week full body, where I bench every single time and I squat twice a week and deadlift once a week. So the way that I did that is on Mondays I did a standard competition squat and then a bench, usually a slingshot bench press. On Wednesdays I did a sumo deadlift just because I've been doing sumo this particular training cycle, and then a competition bench, so a standard pause as well as overhead press. On Fridays I did some kind of a squat variation, so usually a pause squat. Occasionally I would do like a reverse band or a pin squat, and then also some bench press variation. I like to do floor press on those days. So you'll notice that on the Tuesdays and the Thursdays, the intermediate days, those are kind of set up as sort of like bodybuilding days for back and biceps and deltoids, primarily focused. If I could fit those in, I did, but to be honest, those were really kind of optional days just because I'm extremely busy and a lot of times I just simply don't have time for those. I incorporated the principle of specificity. So essentially what that means is specificity pertains to performing the movements, the exercises that are going to be assessed in your competition. So that is to say squat, bench, and deadlift for me personally, because I'm a power lifter. So what I did is, as I mentioned earlier, is a lot of times I would do like a slingshot bench or floor press, or sometimes when I would squat I would do pause squats or reverse band, so some type of a variation. And those things are perfectly fine. A lot of times they can be used to supplement your standard competition lifts. One thing that I will say is that every single week I performed the competition lifts a minimum of once, and as I got further on into my programming I incorporated more specificity, so that is to say I used the competition lifts almost exclusively, and that was certainly the case in the past few weeks where I was in the realization phase working over 90%. And the reason for that is just really to get yourself used to doing those lifts, especially under conditions that are more similar to your meet. So for instance, I stopped doing slingshot bench, I stopped doing floor press as the primary movement. You can still use those as a secondary movement on those days, although I made sure that the focus was always on the competition lifts as I got closer towards the end of this training cycle. And one last thing that I liked to do that I thought was pretty helpful. At the bottom over here I just have some areas of focus, some areas that I knew that I was really lacking on. So I know for sure my triceps are definitely a weak point, and that's definitely one of the limiting factors in my bench press, especially given the huge discrepancy between my close grip bench press and my standard normal grip bench press. So I incorporated more close grip bench, I incorporated slingshot and floor press to really work on that top end of the movement. I noted that I also wanted to do some more dumbbell work because I'm pretty comfortable with a standard barbell bench, but those stabilizer muscles I just really didn't feel like were used that often, so I was particularly bad at that. I incorporated some of that. And front squats is another movement that I wasn't really feeling very comfortable with prior to doing this training cycle, so I made sure to incorporate that quite a bit. And in fact, I used the front squat as an accessory movement following my standard squat or my squat accessory. So twice a week I was doing front squats as well. And then finally abs and core. I can't stress that enough. As a power lifter, I think it's super important to be really strict with abs and core, and sometimes you get busy and say, oh, I did my squat or my deadlift and I worked my core there. But honestly, I think that there's definitely a place for heavy ab work in a power lifter, and I've noticed personally, aside from just doing beltless work, which has certainly helped my core, doing things like weighted crunches, cable crunches, things like that have certainly made a huge difference in my core strength. Anyway, that's pretty much the way I decided to go about my programming. Sorry if the video quality isn't that great. I'm using a kind of shitty camera, but hopefully this kind of gives you guys an idea of how I set it up. This is going to be personal to me, obviously. This is really just so you guys can have an idea of how you might go about setting up your own programming. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing exactly what I did because this program is specific for me and it addresses some of my personal weaknesses. I hope you liked the video. If you did, be sure to give it a like rating, comment below, and if you haven't already, guys, make sure to subscribe. Catch you next time.